I'm going to tell you about some of the stories behind the quilts. These are all my personal quilts. A couple of them I brought are vintage quilts that I purchased, and there are 5 of them that my husband has actually made after I taught him to quilt. This first quilt, Susan and Lydia, if you'd like to hold it up. This is a split 9-patch pattern. It is machine pieced and hand quilted. It's known as a charm quilt because no 2 fabrics in this quilt are the same. I did a trade back in the 1990s when quilting made a resurgence, and it was when I was first introduced to the internet. And there was a group on the internet that made a plea that if you sent 5 charms in the mail, you would return 5 charms to that same person. And so I logged on to this website and I started to do a charm exchange with these people. In this quilt, there are 1,320 charms traded from the United States, Canada, Great Britain, Australia, Russia, Japan, and the Samoan Islands, and all across the United States from all the states. On the label, since there's no 2 fabrics in this quilt that are the same, I put that this would be a great, what they call an I Spy quilt that you do with your grandchildren. You ask them to search for an item and then they go all over the quilt until they find that item. And on the label I've put, there's dogs, a lion, horses, frogs, fish, butterflies, 12 kinds of cats, a penguin on roller skates, a mother goose reading to her chicks, a panther, a bumblebee, Hoosier cows, a pheasant, elephant, camel, rabbits, bears, birds, ducks, dolphins, a moose, King of Hearts, Elvis, coffee pot, false teeth, dentures, John Deere, Iowa Hawkeyes, Dallas Cowboys, Chicago Bears, clowns, cactus. There's one little patch on here that says will work for fabric. Baseball, hearts, flowers, trumpet, piano, banjo, violin, trains, baskets, Walmart, and Ford Mustang. This next quilt is called a row by row, and that's a program that quilt shop owners use to get traffic into their stores, hopefully that they'll purchase fabric. And the rules behind row by row was you would visit each of these quilt shops and they would have their own specially designed row, and you would purchase the little kit and the license plate for that quilt shop, and then you would go home and make the quilt. You had to have purchased at least 8 of the kits to be a quilt, and then the first person back to a quilt shop, your local quilt shop that was participating, won a prize. And so I went around Tennessee, and I even went to Ohio for one of the kits, and I got all my kits together. I went home, I made the quilt, and got back to the local quilt shop here, which is absolutely fun, on Old Fort Parkway. And I asked her if she had anybody turn in a quilt yet. And she said, no, you're the winner. And so for this particular quilt, I won a whole huge bag of fabric and rulers and books and patterns. it was a great time. I was so excited. This next quilt is called Snake River Log Cabin. It is from Judy Martin's book, Snake River Log Cabin book. And it's one of the first quilts that I made. It has a unique design for the border. It's not like a usual log cabin. It's done in Civil War reproduction fabrics, and they are some of my favorites. I entered it in a quilt show in Indiana, and I got a first place ribbon. And this was a fun quilt to make. The top quilt, the peach colored, hand quilted, hand appliqued with a scallop border, came from Texas in an antique store. I found it on a shelf with a bunch of old dirty tools, and I thought, oh my, I have to purchase that quilt and get it out of here. But I love it, and there is a process that you can do with quilting. It's called quilt appraising. And there are certified quilt appraisers that will take your quilt and they will try to track the pattern back to the original pattern date, and they will try to estimate the date of the fabrics, and they will take everything into consideration and give you an insurance replacement value for a quilt. I took this one to a certified quilt appraiser, and she said that the pattern came from a quilt kit back in the 1930s, and she appraised its replacement value at $700. Now that was a bargain, because to rescue it and get it out of the antique store away from all those dirty tools, it only cost me $200. So I made money on that deal. This next quilt is known as a double wedding ring. It is from an antique store in Iowa. It was just laying over a display in the window when I walked by, and I just had to go in and inspect it. It has some wear to it. It also has some stains that I haven't tried to get out. But I thought it was a bargain at only $99, because these edges are scalloped. It's hand quilted, hand pieced, and some quilter had taken the time to design and make this quilt, and I thought it was more than $99, so I just had to have it. Back in the days of early America, when young ladies had to have a dowry, it's said that they should have 12 quilts made by the time that they're ready to get married. The double wedding ring was one of the quilts that they were supposed to have made. It just showed that they were ready for marriage and that they had the skills to take care of their family. And those 12 quilts would be used to cover the beds and keep them warm. This little quilt was part of a challenge. It's American-made brand fabric, and it was number 40 out of 269 entries. They only took 40 to travel around the United States for 2 years. So it went from quilt show to quilt show with its other 39 partners. It had to be a unique design pattern, so I thought, you had to use their fabric, so I'll take their fabrics and make a color wheel, and I'll send in my entry and see if it gets accepted to travel with the group, and it did. I didn't get any monetary winnings for it traveling, just the fact that it went from state to state at quilt shows as an entry for their fabric company. My husband and I, we drove to California to a quilt show there just so that we could see this little quilt hanging with its other 39 partners. The next 5 quilts, they're ours, my husband and I's, but I did not make them, but I quilted them. When I was first quilting, my husband used to go to the quilt shows with me, and he would say, you know, I could probably help you a little bit. And I said, okay. So he said, if I cut up the fabric, would you be able to sew it faster? And I said, sure. So he started cutting fabric and helping me with quilts. And after not too much longer, there was a quilt shop in Indiana, and they were doing block of the month. And every month you got a different block. You go home and sew it, and then you come back, turn it in, and they give you the next block free if you sewed the first one. And so he did that all year for 12 months. And he did such a good job. When we moved to Tennessee, I had him enter it into the Tennessee State Fair, and it got a first place ribbon. And I thought, wow, that's pretty good for a first quilt. And then we were getting some more quilts appraised, and I thought, well, Paul, let's get your quilt appraised too. And so we took it to the quilt appraiser, and they appraised this quilt for $1,350 for insurance replacement. And so we were shocked. That was his very first quilt. But he's very meticulous. You know, in quilting, you want to make sure that all your points come out to a point and all the pieces line up. He would spend hours making sure that his points lined up. And then after he got the top done, then I quilted it for him. So he did really well. The next one that I'm going to talk to you about is his second quilt. He was looking through some of my quilting magazines, and he saw this quilt in basically the same colors. And he said, I'm going to make that quilt, and I'm going to call it the Chain of Life, because to me, it looks like a chain. And I thought, wow, that's a nice challenge to do. And so he started on it, and it took him a while to do it, but he finished it, and he's gotten several good comments on it. He's entered it in a quilt show before and got good comments from the judges at a quilt show. It did not get a first place ribbon, but it's nicely done. It reminds me kind of a race car for some reason. I don't know if it's the black and white flag, but it's definitely a guy quilt. And then for our first anniversary, we had gone to the super conference that Ricky Timms, Alex Anderson, and Libby Lehman would put on for 3 days. And when we went to this conference, we would just sit underneath their teaching, and they taught how to do a flange or a piping on the binding. And so when we got home after going to that conference, he said, I think I'm going to try that piping on my binding. And I thought, oh boy, that's a bold step, because, you know, I hadn't even tried that yet. And he accomplished it. He did a great job. This next quilt is what I called a vitamin quilt. He and I each had one, and I sold mine. Mine ended up being 2 or 3 times bigger than his. After a while, he gave up and he said, I don't want to do that anymore. I came up with this idea that every day you take a vitamin, every day we will make one of these little blocks. And then at the end of the year, we'll have 365 little blocks, and mine did at the end of the year. And about a third of the way through the year, he said, I don't want to do that anymore. The next quilt is his also. He saw it in a magazine, and he asked me, is there anything difficult in quilting that's really difficult? And I said, well, curves are rather difficult. You know, you have to be precise with curves. And he goes, okay, I want to try it. And I thought, okay. So he pulled together a bunch of rainbow fabric, and he calls this quilt Rainbow Delight. It is 68 by 94. It's machine pieced and machine quilted by myself, and he made it in 2017. And then one day he was going through my fabrics, and I noticed that he was pulling out all the florals. Any fabric that had a flower on it, he would set it off to the side. And I asked him, why do you have all of those flowers pulled out? And he said, because I want to make you some flowers that you'll always have. How sweet is that? And it's called Flowers for Rebecca, and it's 54 by 68. It's machine pieced and machine quilted. This next quilt, Paul had an older sister that had not been well, and this is an example of a panel with borders around it. So the panel does most of the work for the quilting. All you have to do is add maybe a few borders and you have a quilt made. So we made this quilt for Paul's sister, who was in the hospital around Christmas time. And shortly after that, she passed away, and Paul got the quilt back from the family. The next quilt is my first attempt at applique. And this is raw edge applique. He's my tiger. And it is machine quilted, and it's 24 by 26. I have him on the wall behind my long arm quilting machine. He keeps me company. Now the next few quilts you're going to see, they have a theme to them. This first quilt with two bears, 11 by 11 inches, was a guild challenge. The next quilt is, and they're all raw edge applique machine quilted. I decided to do a one bear in the woods. The next one is my Gatlinburg bear. Around the Paul and I's favorite place to eat in the Smokies is the old mill. And so I have a small little panel of the old mill, and then I just added some leaves and a bear, of course. You can see what the theme is. Everything has a bear. I love to go to the Smokies and look for bear. Show them the back of that, the backing fabric. Of course, it has a bear on it. And then this is the 2026 challenge for this year at Murfreesboro Quilting Bees. We were to make a 24-inch circle, and this circle was supposed to represent ourselves. And so yellow was my mother's favorite color. And then I cut out all of these little bears individually and English paper pieced them into a 24-inch circle. This is another bear quilt that I made just because I was fascinated with bears. Bears in the Smokies, and I always go to the Smokies to see daffodils. So I added a daffodil on the border, and it is raw edge applique also. This next bear is kind of a collage of flowers to make a bear. We took a class. It's a Laura Heine pattern, and there was a few of us that took the class, and then I went home and quilted it on my domestic machine with just straight line quilting. Since it was raw edge applique, I needed a way to secure all the pieces so that they would not come off, because several of the pieces are quite small. So, and show them the back of that one. Oh, of course, it's got bears on it. You can see a theme here, can't you? Bears, lots of bear quilts. This next one was a quilt that I made a long time ago, before Paul had started quilting, so it's got some age to it. But it has a story behind it, because I had cut out all of these little individual teddy bears, and I had put it together with some tan fabric. And when I got the whole quilt top put together with tan fabric, I held it up, and Paul and I both agreed that you lose the teddy bears because there's no contrast between the fabrics. And so I said, well, what should we do? And he said, well, I'll just take them all apart. And I said, the whole quilt? He said, yeah, we don't want to waste all those little teddy bears that you've cut out. So he took the whole quilt top apart, and I put it together with this teal fabric, and now the little teddy bears show up. But we had those white pieces. Here, flip the quilt. So I thought, well, why couldn't we just make a reversible quilt and use the teal fabric and place the teddy bears, and this is the only reversible quilt that I've ever made. Okay, so much with all the bears. This is the last bear quilt I'm going to show you. This is a panel also, and then I had a small panel with all the buildings in Cades Cove, so I put them around the edge and the border, and the bear panel in the center, and then just added a floral border, and it made a fast quilt. A quilt instructor that I like to follow is Bonnie Hunter, and she's an international quilt teacher. She travels around the United States and teaches classes. She goes out of the country, she goes on cruises. She's recently not wanting to travel so much anymore, so she set up her own quilt retreat in Mouth of Wilson, Virginia. And we've gone to that retreat a couple of years and got to be with her and be under her teaching. She actually came to Smyrna to teach this class, and so some friends of mine and myself took this class. It's called Bricks in the Barnyard, and it's machine pieced and machine quilted, but it's made out of men's old shirts torn apart and then used as scrappy fabrics, and also some woven fabrics are in here to make up the difference. It was a fun class. She's a good teacher. She explains things quite well when she teaches you a class. She'll tell you 2 or 3 different ways to do the pattern, and then you choose the one that's best for you. The next quilt is another one of Bonnie Hunter's patterns. It is called Sandcastles, and it was actually featured in a quilt art engagement calendar in 2022. It was entered into the Smokies Quilt Show. It did not win a ribbon, but Claudine Hansen, who was over taking entries for the quilt art engagement calendar, saw it, and she said, could I please use your quilt for my calendar? And I said, sure. So it was featured in her calendar, and 3 years after it was featured in her calendar, she passed away. She was a great teacher in Pigeon Forge at the Pigeon Forge Quilt Show, and she will be sorely missed. This last quilt, the original maker of the quilt is Susan Garman. She was a CPA for NASA. Her husband, Jack, was a rocket scientist for NASA. And in her spare time, she would quilt. They were both partners in Apollo 11. And I saw her original quilt in Mount Juliet at a quilt shop there. She had made this quilt, same size, same number of blocks, and she sent it around from quilt shop around the United States with a stack of her patterns to sell her pattern. And so when I saw it hanging on the wall at the quilt shop in Mount Juliet, I thought, oh, I've got all those little pieces that I could put into this quilt. I want to make that quilt. I just couldn't think about anything else. And so this ended up being a car project. Each one of these little 9-patch blocks I cut out and put in a baggie. And each one of these little 4-patch blocks I would put in another baggie. And when we would travel and we were on trips or we would go anywhere of any length and I was in the car, I was hand piecing this quilt. This quilt has 10,064 pieces. The majority of the fabrics in it are Civil War reproduction fabrics, which are my favorite, but there are some other fabrics in here that are blended in with those. It was a fun quilt to make, and I thought that after I got it done, I was just so impressed with her pattern. She called it, "Oh my gosh." Her friends told her she should name the pattern, "That's just crazy." But she named it, "Oh my gosh." But I thought after I got the quilt done, I would take a picture and send it to her. But she passed away that year, so I did not get to communicate with her. And her husband passed away not too long after that also. I would like you to visit our Quilt Guild, Murfreesboro Quilting Bees. We meet the 2nd and the 4th Thursday of each month. We meet at St. Mark's Methodist Church on Rutherford Boulevard.